I never thought I'd be the kind of man who sits in a parking lot for 40 minutes, hands gripping a steering wheel, unable to move. But that's exactly where I found myself on a Tuesday evening in October, engine off, staring at nothing, trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Thomas Hargrove. I'm 51 years old, a civil engineer by trade, a father by calling, and a fool by circumstance. This is the story of how everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a carefully constructed lie, and how the truth, when it finally came for me, came like a freight train with no brakes. I married Vivian in 1998. She was 24, laughing at something her friend said when I first saw her at a mutual colleague's birthday dinner, and I remember thinking that I had never in my life seen a woman so completely alive. She had that particular kind of beauty that doesn't ask permission. It simply occupies the room. Dark auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a confidence that I, at 27 and still somewhat shy around women, found almost intimidating. We dated for 14 months and married quietly, just family and close friends, in a small ceremony in Vermont. She wore her grandmother's pearls. I cried when she walked down the aisle, which embarrassed me greatly at the time, but which she claimed to have loved. Our daughter, Nina, was born in 2003. She came into the world at 6 pounds and 11 ounces, furious about it, screaming before she was fully delivered. She never really stopped having opinions. Nina grew up to be fierce, funny, and smarter than both of us combined, which Vivienne would claim credit for, and I would argue was equally my contribution. It was the good kind of argument, the kind that meant we were happy. Or so I believed. I found out about the affair in March of last year, and I want to be precise about this because the details matter more than people realize when they read stories like mine. It wasn't a lipstick on the collar discovery. It wasn't a mysterious phone call or a late night that didn't add up. It was a photograph, a single digital photograph that Vivienne accidentally sent to our shared cloud album, the one we'd set up years ago to automatically collect family photos. She was with a man named Conrad Slater. I recognized him immediately, which was its own particular cruelty. Conrad had been Vivienne's boyfriend before me. Her serious relationship she'd always described in vague, slightly uncomfortable terms whenever the subject came up. They'd dated for nearly 3 years in her early 20s. She'd told me, early in our own relationship, that Conrad had been controlling, possessive. That breaking up with him had required something close to strategy. In the photograph, they were at what appeared to be an outdoor restaurant. Vivienne was leaning into him, her hand on his chest. Not the posture of two old friends catching up. The photo had a timestamp. They'd been together on a Friday evening when she'd told me she was attending a work event in the city. I sat with that photograph for 6 days before I said anything. I know that sounds like a long time, and it was. I checked phone records during those 6 days. I reviewed our shared calendar with new eyes. I counted, conservatively, 14 occasions over the previous 5 months where her stated location and her actual whereabouts did not align. When I finally confronted her on a Sunday morning, Nina was at a friend's house. I had made coffee. I set my phone on the kitchen table with the photograph open, and I said, very calmly, "I need you to explain this to me." Vivienne looked at the phone. Then she looked at me. Then she sat down, and instead of crying or panicking or immediately denying it, she said, "How long have you known?" That response told me everything. Not shock, not shame, just tactical calculation. How much does he know? Long enough, I said. What followed was a 2-hour conversation that I can only describe as the systematic dismantling of 23 years. She admitted the affair. She admitted it had been going on for 7 months. She did not, notably, express remorse so much as relief. The relief of someone who had been carrying something heavy and was glad to set it down, regardless of where it landed or who it crushed. She said she still had feelings for Conrad. She said our marriage had grown stagnant. Her word, stagnant, like I was a pond she'd grown tired of, and that Conrad made her feel the way she had when she was young. I listened to all of it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. When she finished, I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and said I needed some air. I walked to the park 3 blocks from our house and sat on a bench for 2 hours, watching dogs chase each other, completely hollow. Nina took the news of our separation with the particular devastation of a young person who has spent her whole life assuming her parents were one of the good ones. She was 18 then, a freshman at the state university, home for spring break when we sat her down to tell her. Vivian had insisted we do it together, which I agreed to because I thought it was right, not because I wanted to be in the same room as her. Nina cried. Then she got angry. Then she asked questions neither of us answered particularly well. She went back to university 2 days later, quieter than she'd arrived, and I spent the following weeks trying to balance my own grief with worry about hers. I moved into a rental apartment. We began working with a mediator on the divorce. It was civil, in the cold and exhausted way that civility sometimes is. Not kindness, just the absence of enough energy for open warfare. Then, in June, Nina called me from school. She was crying before she finished saying hello, and the sound of it, my daughter's voice in that particular register, cut through every numbed-down emotion I'd been carefully managing for 3 months. "Dad," she said, "I have to tell you something, and I don't know how." I sat down. "Tell me." Mom introduced me to someone. Back in April, when I came home for the weekend. She said he was an old friend of hers, someone she wanted me to meet because he works in urban development, and she thought it would be good for my career networking. She made it seem casual. She drove me to this lunch, and then she said she had an errand, and she'd be back in an hour. My stomach had already moved to the floor. "Nina," I said slowly. "Who was the man?" She said the name, Conrad Slater. The silence that followed that name lasted a very long time. I want to be precise here too, because this is the part of the story that requires the most care. Conrad Slater, I learned during those 6 days of investigating, after I found the photograph, was not simply Vivian's college boyfriend. He was a man with a history I had never been fully shown. In the late 2000s, he had been named in a civil lawsuit brought by a former business partner, allegations of financial manipulation and coercion. The case had settled out of court. More recently, a woman in the city where he lived had filed and then withdrawn a restraining order against him. I had no way of knowing what had happened there, but I knew the pattern of a man who operated without consequences and had learned to make problems disappear before they became public. Vivian knew this. She had lived with the reality of who Conrad was in her own early 20s. She had described getting out of that relationship as requiring something close to strategy. She knew. And she had put our 18-year-old daughter at a table with him, alone, and driven away. When Nina told me what had happened at that lunch, she was clear that Conrad had been, in her words, immediately weird. Too personal too quickly, commenting on how much she looked like her mother at that age, asking whether she was seeing anyone, touching her forearm when he made a point. When she had texted her mother asking when she was coming back, Vivian had responded that she was running behind and that Nina should enjoy getting to know him. He's wonderful. Nina had excused herself to use the restroom and sat in a bathroom stall for 20 minutes, texting a friend, before Vivian finally returned. Nothing criminal had occurred, but my daughter had been frightened, confused, and she had been there because her mother had put her there. She hadn't told me right away because she hadn't understood why it had felt so wrong, and because telling me meant explaining who Conrad was, and she hadn't known if I knew about the affair at that point. When she finally pieced it together over the following weeks, when a mutual family friend let slip something about her mother and Conrad, she called me. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after she finished. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "First, above everything else, are you okay?" "I'm okay, Dad. Nothing happened, but I feel sick about it." "I need you to know," I said, "that none of this is your fault, not a single atom of it." I know that. But Dad, why would she do that? I didn't have a full answer then. The full answer came later, from a source I didn't expect. Vivian's younger sister Paula has never been close to Vivian. They are 5 years apart and have spent most of their adult lives in the polite but distant orbit of women who share a childhood but not a world view. Paula lives in another state. She came to visit when she heard about our separation. She called me directly, which surprised me, and asked if she could take me to lunch. Over sandwiches at a place near my apartment, Paula told me things about Conrad Slater and Vivienne's history with him that I had never known. That Conrad had not simply been a controlling boyfriend. He had been, by any reasonable accounting, emotionally abusive. That Vivienne's family had helped her end the relationship. That Conrad had spent years, off and on, attempting to re-enter Vivienne's life and had always been rebuffed. She went back to him, I said. Paula nodded. I think he offered her something she convinced herself she needed. But here's what I need you to understand about Conrad. She paused. He's obsessive, and he collects things, leverage, favors. He doesn't just want a woman. He wants to own the whole situation around her. What are you saying? I'm saying that introducing him to Nina wasn't about networking. My sister isn't that stupid. Conrad would have asked for it. He would have framed it somehow. Curiosity, wanting to see what their life had produced, whatever story he told her. And Vivian would have rationalized it, or she would have been afraid to say no, or both. She was afraid of him, I said. She has always been afraid of him, and she has always gone back anyway. That's the part one could never understand. I thought about that for a long time afterward. I am not, even now, entirely certain how much of what Vivienne did was calculated cruelty, and how much was the behavior of a woman trapped in something she had no language left to refuse. The truth is probably some tangled combination of both. It doesn't absolve her, but it matters for understanding what happened next. There is a man in town named Robert Ellison. He is a well-regarded family attorney who also serves on the board of the local chapter of a non-profit that works with survivors of domestic abuse and intimate partner coercion. I had retained him for my divorce proceedings. When I came to him with what Nina had told me, with the dates, the details, the history of Conrad Slater, he listened without interrupting for almost 20 minutes. Then he said, "Thomas, this is larger than your divorce." He helped me understand what we had. Nina was an adult, which complicated certain things, but the history of Conrad Slater, the civil lawsuit, the withdrawn restraining order, the documented pattern, combined with evidence of what Vivienne had orchestrated, opened doors I hadn't considered. Robert reached out to the woman who had filed and then withdrawn the restraining order. He found her in another city. It took 3 weeks of careful, respectful contact, but she agreed to speak. Her name was Angela. She was now in her mid-30s, married, with 2 young children. She spoke to Robert and, eventually, to me, with a composure that I understood came not from a lack of pain, but from having built herself back from something that would have destroyed many people. What Conrad had done to her, she described in careful detail. What he had threatened. How the restraining order had been withdrawn because he had found a way to make continuing it feel more dangerous than dropping it. We took everything to a contact Robert had at the district attorney's office. I want to be honest. I am not entirely sure how much of what followed came from that meeting and how much came from other investigations that were already quietly underway. I do know that by September, Conrad Slater was being formally investigated. By November, there were charges. But let me tell you about the day that everything became public, because that is the day my reaction surprised people, and I think it's the part of the story that matters most to tell correctly. The annual community gala for the Hospital Foundation is an event our family had attended for years. Vivian and I had been regular donors. It was held at the ballroom of the biggest hotel in town. I had, in a moment of either stubbornness or genuine commitment to the foundation's work, decided to attend that year. Some people thought that was strange, given the circumstances. I didn't care. I didn't know that Vivienne would be there. I also didn't know that she had brought Conrad. When I saw them from across the ballroom, Vivienne in a black dress, Conrad's hand at the small of her back, both of them absorbed in conversation with a couple I vaguely recognized, something moved through me that I can only describe as a kind of absolute clarity, not rage, not grief, something colder and more certain than either. I did not walk over to them. I did not make a scene. Instead, I excused myself from the conversation I was in and found Robert Ellison, who was also in attendance. I said 2 sentences to him quietly. He nodded and made a phone call. I then walked to the table where several prominent members of the community were seated, including 2 city council members, a local judge who was a family acquaintance, and the foundation's chair. I sat down. I joined their conversation. I was calm. About 20 minutes later, 2 detectives arrived at the ballroom entrance. They were quiet about it. No dramatic entrance, no uniforms. But they were looking for someone specific. The hotel's security manager met them and pointed across the room. Several people at surrounding tables noticed. Conversations began to quiet in that spreading way that happens in large rooms when something unexpected occurs. Conrad Slater was taken from that ballroom with a minimum of chaos but a maximum of witnesses. It was not an arrest built for spectacle, but spectacle arrived anyway, because rooms full of people who know each other are their own particular kind of amplifier. Vivienne stood perfectly still when they approached him. I watched her from across the room. Her face cycled through several expressions: shock, then a kind of terror, then something that might have been, underneath everything, relief. The same relief, perhaps, as when she'd sat at our kitchen table and the secret she'd been carrying was finally out. I did not feel triumph. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was an exhausted, aching sense of something having been set right. Not right as in return to what it was, because there is no version of right that brings back 23 years or unfrightens my daughter at a lunch table with a dangerous man. But right as in balanced. As in the world having finally noticed something that had been ignored for too long. Nina came home for Thanksgiving 6 weeks later. She was thinner than she'd been in the summer, but there was something steadier in her eyes, the way people sometimes look when they've survived something and found that they survived it. We made dinner together in my apartment. It's small, and the kitchen is barely large enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time, which meant we kept bumping elbows and laughing about it. She made her grandmother's stuffing recipe, the one with the cornbread and the excessive amount of butter, and I handled the turkey and made a questionable decision about the cranberry situation that she mocked me for with great enthusiasm. After dinner, we sat on my small couch with the television off, and she asked me what was going to happen now. With your mother and me, I said, we finished the divorce. That's already in motion, and I think it'll be concluded in the spring. And Conrad? That's out of my hands now. It's where it belongs. She was quiet for a moment. Are you angry at her, Mum? I thought about it seriously before I answered, because she deserved a serious answer. Yes, I said. I think I'll probably be angry about certain things for a long time. What she allowed to happen with you, what she arranged. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand it, and the part one don't understand is the part that's hardest to let go of. She called me, Nina said, last week. I know, you told me. She cried. She said she didn't think anything would happen. She said Conrad told her it was innocent, that he just wanted to see what kind of young woman I'd become. She paused. She might even believe that. Maybe, I said, but wanting to believe something is innocent doesn't make you innocent for choosing to believe it. Nina nodded slowly. I don't know what I'm going to do about her, about having a relationship with her. I'm not ready to decide. You don't have to be, I said. That decision belongs entirely to you. Take whatever time you need. She leaned her head against my shoulder, which she hadn't done since she was probably 12, and we sat like that for a while, watching the dark outside the window. You know what surprised me most? She said finally. What? When everything came out publicly and people were asking how you'd reacted, everyone expected you to have, I don't know, exploded, done something dramatic, screamed at Mom in public, or confronted Conrad yourself, or made some huge scene. She paused. But you didn't. You just let the truth do it. The truth was enough, I said. People didn't expect that from you. I know. I think, she said carefully, that that's actually the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Because the easy thing would have been to explode. The easy thing would have been to make it about your anger. But you held on to it until it could matter. I didn't say anything for a moment. I had a good reason to hold on to it, I said finally. She knew I meant her. Conrad Slater, as of the time I'm writing this, has been formally charged on 2 counts. Charges that involve Angela's testimony and a financial matter connected to his business dealings that investigators uncovered in the course of the investigation. The case is ongoing. I don't follow the updates obsessively. Robert keeps me informed of what's relevant. Vivian and I finalized our divorce in April. She moved across the state. We communicate when necessary about Nina, briefly and without hostility. I don't know what her life looks like now, and I find that I have mostly stopped trying to understand it. My apartment is still small. The kitchen is still too narrow for 2 people. But I've started cooking seriously for the first time in my adult life. It turns out I'm reasonably competent at it, which is one of the genuinely surprising discoveries of starting over at 51. I run 3 mornings a week. I sleep better than I have in years, which is strange and also somehow logical. Nina finished her freshman year in the top third of her class. She's studying environmental engineering, which she chose entirely herself and which makes me unreasonably proud. She has a group of good friends. She laughs easily. She is, by any measure I can observe, all right. Justice, when it finally came, didn't arrive the way I imagined justice was supposed to arrive. It didn't feel like winning. It didn't feel like vindication in the clean, cinematic way people sometimes describe. It felt quieter than that. More like the moment after a very long storm, when the air is still and you step outside and realize that the thing you were most afraid of losing, not your marriage, not your image of yourself, not your past, but your child. Your child's safety. Her ability to trust the world. That, it turned out, was still intact. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in the end, everything.